What we're talking about here with the issue of Common Core is something that we obviously have been opposing to a lesser degree than Concerned Women for America. We oppose it, but we talked with Tanya Ditty, Jane Robbins, and several of the folks at the start of the year, and just made the decision. We would kind of follow their lead on a lot of things because Concerned Women for America has been at the forefront at very early stages, along with American Principles Project, of opposing Common Core from its very early stages. Of first recognizing the threat, which is a threat that is very real, and it is very real to a lot of the things that we've all in this room been working on for the last number of years. Those of us that believe in choice, that believe in empowering parents and students and teachers in the decision-making process of which education model best fits their child. All of those things ultimately boil down to local control. All those things boil down to the most local control we can have. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the parent. And so when you see something like Common Core, which is just, to me, a rehash of what we've seen time and time again, No Child Left Behind, and all long before that, we recognize we can call a spade a spade. And so Tanya has her master's in education from
West Georgia.
West Georgia, okay.
Anything on that?
Yeah,
It's
that's
been a while.
But Tanya has been on the forefront. She's the president of State Director of Concerned Women for America Legislative Action Committee, which I think you're going to talk about some today. And I'm just going to turn it over to her to speak for about half an hour and then take a few questions toward the end of the session.
Sounds good.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Thank you, Joel and Americans for Prosperity. It is a joy to be able to partner with them. And if I might, can I correct it? It's Tanya.
Oh, Tanya.
Tanya. It's spelled Tanya, but it's Tanya. So, but I have handed out to you. If you didn't get one, we have a recently updated brochure on the Common Core that includes the changes that have come out of the governor's office. So we updated that. If you did not get one, I'll be happy to give you one. And then also just a brochure on my organization, if you're not familiar with that. So what I would like to do is give, I was asked to give just kind of an overview of what Common Core is all about, but more importantly, what's our strategy for the 2013-2014 legislative session, actually starting now, moving through the legislative session. So I will be covering that at the end. Virginia also mentioned there has been a lot of movement on the Common Core to our benefit, and I will cover that toward the end of just whipping through some slides to make sure I give you that foundation if you're not familiar with the Common Core. So we have had some good achievements, and we will acknowledge those, but I will acknowledge that we've got some work to do. And so that's where we're going to go. Because I always run out of time at the end, I just wanted to acknowledge that on the front of this brochure, we do have our website. It is actually it's stopcommoncore.com, but as early as last Wednesday, I should say as late as last Wednesday, we have created a georgia.stopcommoncore.com. We had all the Georgia information on the stopcommoncore.com, and we extracted it out so we could have a focus for things just for Georgia. And we also maintain the second one. It has more of a national, so if you want to keep up with what's going on nationally, that's there. And then we also have a video that we partnered with the American Principles Project to create the video. You can get it on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube. You can also order it as well. But it's 32 minutes. It is a great resource on all about the Common Core in Georgia. So I'm going to just quickly go through. I'm going to define it, big picture, and then I'll try to kind of flesh out each one of these. But if you had to ask what is the Common Core State Standards Initiative, the next time I update my presentation, which I will do immediately, I'm taking out the word state standards because it wasn't state-led, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the Common Core Initiative is made up of three different things. It's made up of national standards. They are standards that have been pushed down nationally. It's made up of national testing, And that's changed a bit in the state of Georgia, but the national testing is what's going to push curriculum, and then data tracking. All of that is all mixed in with the Common Core initiative. So how did we get here? If this was not a state-led issue, how did we get here? Well, there were really three players in the push for national standards, and I've listed them up here. The National Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and ACHIEVE, Inc. So big picture is the cover that they have given to say that Common Core was a state-led issue is they funneled them through two trade organizations that sound very educational. I'm sorry, very state-led. The National Governors Association. It is no secret that for several decades there has been a push for the nationalization of our school system and for our standards. And that there probably are some governors out there that really want a national push of education. But that is not what they were sitting around the table doing. That's not what they do at the National Governors Association. They're a trade organization. Not all governors belong to the National Governors Association. And then, of course, the Council of Chief State School Officers, that's your state superintendent's trade organization. So again, they're trade organizations. Their job is not to write standards, and they were never given any authority, legislative authority from the states to even embark on this. This has always been a state issue. And what they did is they went through ACHIEVE Inc. to write the standards. And the ACHIEVE Inc. is a private organization out of Washington, D.C. So that's who's behind the scenes. And of course, those top two organizations receive federal dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of federal dollars. So they're influenced federally. And then the other financer is Bill and Melinda Gates. I'll say their name probably several times throughout, but they are the ones that are putting the financing behind this. And in a minute, I'm going to show you all the different mixtures of people that were at the Gates Foundation that are now over with the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. But they have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this effort. And I don't know, I did not elect Bill Gates. He's not an elected official, but he is out there making all the decisions. And that's just got to stop. All right, so how did the federal government then get involved in here? Well, we start with the stimulus bill back in 2008. In the stimulus bill, there was earmarked $435 billion that was going to the U.S. Department of Education, and they used that money through Race to the Top grants. And Georgia received a Race to the Top grant. And what was a part of that Race to the Top grant? If you go out and look on the Georgia Department of Education site, you will see that in the grant, we had to agree to a common set of standards. This is how the federal government, Arne Duncan and Barack Obama, got involved with this. They said, if you want our money, you have to adopt word for word a set of standards, a common set of standards. Well, guess what the common set of standards were out there? The Common Core. It was just a perfect storm for them to come in, dangle the money. We took it, and I always say this was not Governor Deal's doing, nor was it John Barge's doing. This was a previous administration and a previous state superintendent. But what we're asking is for leadership to get us out of it. But that is how the federal government is involved. And you know that we've got an addiction. We've got lawmakers that are addicted to federal money. And with that federal money comes a large stick. And that large stick is the Common Core standards and the national testing and the data tracking. So that's how they're involved. So I'm going to rush through this. But if you want to follow the money and you want to follow what's going on behind the scenes, David Coleman and Jason Zimba are the two major people that are the writers of the standards. So David Coleman and two other writers wrote the English language arts standards. They're the writers. And most of them don't even have English language arts background. And then Jason Zimba is one of the two math writers. Sorry, one of the three major math writers. And Jason Zimba is already stating that there's problems with the math. So these are the people that wrote the standards. They weren't written by educators in the state of Georgia. There weren't teachers out there helping write. There wasn't Department of Education writing the standards. And so you can follow the money. So let me go to the next one. So now you've got Arnie Duncan in the middle, and the two people on either side used to be with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and now they're sitting over at the U.S. Department of Education. So you can see how tied together they are. So here's a quote. It's not unfair to say that the Gates Foundation's agenda has become the country's agenda in education. And that the Gates Foundation and the Education Secretary Duncan move in apparent lockstep together. So that's the influence that we have. And how did Georgia get here? Oh my gosh, really, really quick. In November of 2009, the Race to the Top application was released, and it was due in January of 2010. The legislature wasn't in session at all during this time period. That was purposeful. And the standards weren't written. The tests weren't written. And so we signed on in March before the draft of the standards even came out. And what you're going to hear from the Georgia Department of Education, who embraces the Common Core, what they'll say is, oh, but for 30 days, we looked at the standards. That's protocol in Georgia. And I'll give them that. That is protocol in Georgia. But normally, the 30 days is, we all have a chance to look at it, but I could probably go back to my local school and say, okay, so now, can you give me a little more background on what you did for the last 2 years? But there's no one to go to in the state to figure out what work was done, because it was all done outside the state of Georgia. So finally, in June of 2010, the standards were released. The school board signed on to them 1 month later. They didn't even do due diligence out there to do that. We actually heard from one state school board member, doesn't live in this area, and said they didn't even know anything about it, but yet they just signed off on it. We were appalled. Appalled. On that, and so we're committed. Okay, so what's happened is, and this is basically what Joel said, one other way that we have Common Core is just through the No Child Left Behind waiver. Only 26 counties took the Race to the Top grant. A lot of counties didn't take it, but the rest of us got stuck because the state did the No Child Left Behind waiver, and we had to adopt the Common Core. Common Core opponents always say that this is a state-led effort. Certainly states have followed, but they did not lead. And then here's the problem that we have. At the state legislature, there was no long-term cost analysis done. There were no public meetings held around the state on the standards. There was no long-term budget, and the legislature did not officially, no one informed officially the Assembly about the Common Core. Now, I would like to be on record to say that I don't think it's the legislature's role to write standards. Most of them are not educators, and we need professional educators over at the Department of Education that can write standards. But when you've got such a dramatic shift in the way education is happening, I want my legislator to have a voice. I only have a couple voices that I vote for, and that's my state rep, my Senate, state senator, and of course my governor and my state superintendent. Those are my only voices that I have. The state school board is appointed. And so since there's such a dramatic change in the way things were happening in education, our assembly should have had a role in that, should have had a say in that. And when it comes to the money, should have had a say in that. And so that's where we stand. They circumvented all of that. Okay, so what's been lost? Sovereignty over education, and we want it back. That's all we're asking, is just give us our sovereignty over education back. If there's a part of some of the Common Core standards that are good, great. Don't throw the babies out with the bathwater. But let us have that decision of what to change and what not to change. All right, so let me just talk quickly about the standards. They're only in math and language arts, but we do know that social studies, the framework for social studies, is in the process of being written. And we do know that Governor Deal and Dr. Barge are on record as saying over our dead bodies, are we going to have social studies, being done nationally? But, all it does is all you gotta do is offer a stick of money, and you never know what'll happen if money's offered. But right now, it's just the math and language arts. Why we have a problem with them is they were never vetted or tested or piloted. Nothing was happened along those lines. Their claims that they're rigorous, this is what we hear all the time, but they're harder. Well, just because they're harder doesn't make them better. And if they're harder, it might not necessarily mean they're harder, it might mean that they're confusing. Kids are really struggling. Well, who's to say that it's just that they're confusing standards? And so let's talk just a minute on the math standards. Dr. James Milbrook was the only mathematician that served on the validation committee that refused to sign off on the math standards, and here's a couple reasons why. One, algebra is delayed until the 9th grade. And listen, I'm not a mathematician, and I never could figure out why this was so bad until I started studying it and listening to people and listening to mathematicians. Number one, algebra is the gateway math course to all of your upper level math classes. So if you're not getting algebra until the 9th grade, then it's very possible you won't ever get to calculus, which is required for your top tier colleges. Remember I mentioned Jason Zimba, one of the writers of the math standards? He's now on record of saying, well, it's possible that some of our kids going into college might not have enough math because of the Common Core, and that they're going to have to take more math classes. Now tell me, why are we doing that? Don't we want to prepare our kids in high school instead of going into college and then having to take all those remedial math? Something's wrong with that picture on there. And then, of course, geometry. We are using a geometry, a method which has never been proven and has never worked. But we're using it. We're signing on to it. All right, so quickly, what's missing in the math standards? I didn't bring it with me. Out on our website, georgia.stopcommoncore.com, if you go to Georgia standards versus the Common Core, we had 2 experts do an analysis of the math standards and the English language arts. And this is what was found missing out of the Common Core. And what they'll say is, oh, but we teach it. Well, what they might be teaching, and they might teach it now in 5th grade instead of 2nd grade. So here are some of the things that are missing. Probability in elementary, which means they'll get it later, which means that delays them. Mean, median, mode, that would be statistics, which means that is gone in elementary, which means they might get it later, but that means they're delaying progress for kids in math. The concept of pi is gone in elementary. So there's some of your geometry, again, gone in elementary, delaying the students. The fundamental theorem of arithmetic, gone. What has been proven for centuries, we're not teaching it anymore. We're doing our own method, a Common Core anyway, using fractions, decimals, and percentages. Oh, 1/2. 1/2 is equal to what? 0.5. Those types of things. All gone, completely gone. Measurement, density and velocity, division of fraction by a fraction, all gone in elementary school. And of course, algebra, majority of Georgia students will not reach calculus in high school as expected by selected universities. This, again, it's slowing the kids down, and it's giving them just the minimum that they need. And that's not what's in the best interest of our Georgia students. And if I were a parent, I'd be irate over it. Because I want my kids to get the best foundation of education so they can be anything they want to be. So what we say, and we'll stick to it, is Common Core is a workforce development model. Give those kids just what they need to be able to join the workforce and not be able to do anything else beyond that. All right, and this is just a 2nd grade math example. We have this out on our website. All they want to do is have the kids do 9 + 4 = 13, and they have to do all these squirrely ways of doing it. If you go into early elementary grade levels, I saw this before I left the school system in January, they do math talks. Teachers are trained in elementary 1st grade, 2nd grade to do math talks. And what they do is the kids, you give them 9 + 4 is 13, so then they have to talk it out. Sometimes they're to take 30 minutes to talk out what 9 plus 4 is. And what they want them to do is, how did you get to that, solve that problem? How do you feel about your answer? You know, do you feel like you could, a lot of feelings involved in it. And the kids are very frustrated. Little boys in particular, we've heard cry. Why? What do you know about little boys? They're not verbal. That is not, they're not developed that yet to be verbal. The girls can talk all day long, but the little boys are not verbal. They just want to learn it and move on. And so we always joke about the Common Core, at least the Georgia Performance Standards aren't making kids cry. And, but yeah, they're frustrated because they know it and they just want to move on, but they have the math talk around it. And teachers went through all this training. I'm going to skip over that one. All right, let's go to English Language Arts. Dr. Stotsky actually came and testified in Georgia when we had our Common Core bill hearing. She said the language arts standards are just empty skill sets. They don't teach them anything. You just read. And here is what we know about the Common Core, that it's, there's going to be a heavier push toward informational text versus the classics. Informational text is the way that they're going to push their propaganda, because it's going to be through, well, they're going to, whoever's in charge of the tests are going to decide what's going to be in the curriculum, because that's whatever's tested is going to be taught, and who knows what's going to be out there. We know that they're doing executive orders, global warming, all that type of thing, propaganda. So we know that classics make good readers. Here in Georgia, oh my gosh, the Department of Education pulled this down, but this was one of the books that was used, is still being used. It's part of an English Language Arts 10th grade lesson plan. It's In the Time of Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. And this book glorifies Fidel Castro and is very anti-male, talks about men getting drunk. I mean, just very, very anti-male. It is pro-feminist. It is propaganda. And this is one of the books that was on the recommended reading list. And it was a Georgia Department of Education lesson plan. There was an article written about this, and then we posted where people could go out to look at the lesson plan, and it didn't take long for that lesson plan to be pulled down. So, but it's still out there because school districts have it in their arsenal. All right, this is what we know, that the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, which received grant money from Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they went out and scored the standards in each state. And we know that Georgia was better than the Common Core standards. We ranked higher. So it is not true when they say that 85 or 90% of the Common Core standards were based on Georgia's standards. Our standards were better than theirs. And the question is, if our standards were better, why did we trade down and shackle ourselves to standards that we aren't even allowed to change? Because according to the Race to the Top grant, we can't change the standards. They're copyrighted on there. So now this is, I'm going to go to this chart. If you go out and look at our comparison documents, where Senator Ligon, the sponsor of our legislation, actually had Dr. Stotsky, the top English language arts curriculum person in the country, did the analysis. And she went out and looked at the averages. She has a way that they score, through the Fordham Institute has a way that they score. And you can see that the Georgia Performance Standards scored higher on the 4 categories by which they score in over the Common Core standards. Reading pedagogy was higher, value of literacy study, Georgia Performance Standards was higher, organization and disciplinary coverage was higher, the quality of the standards were higher. We scored higher, but we traded down. This is a great analysis done by her. And it's at your fingertips. You can go out and look at it. So standards versus curriculum, this is what we hear all the time out of both the governor's office and the Department of Education, that we just adopted standards. Well, I'm an educator, and I will tell you, whatever is tested is what's going to be taught. And standards always drive curriculum anyway. And if everything is going to be common, teachers, they say, well, teachers can pick whatever way they want to teach in the classroom. But if everything has to be common, that means whatever's happening in classroom A has to happen in classroom B, has to happen in classroom C. That is not flexibility among the teachers. So it's not true. And when the national tests come out, that's going to change everything on there. Now, standards versus curriculum, some of the major benefits of common standards will be, this is from Arnie Duncan, the coordination of information that could inform the development and implementation of curriculum. So they already have the goal of that. PARC is testing model content frameworks. PARC is the testing consortium that Georgia was a part of and that Governor Deal and Dr. Barge pulled us out of, which was a good thing. But they've got content frameworks. That's curriculum. All right, so that's the standards. I only put this up. This is a superintendent in Colorado, but I like his quote because I think it tells you what those higher people that think they know more than the average person. I want you to look at the third bullet of what he said. Letting teachers exercise professional judgment and what to teach in their classrooms is no way to run a school. That's a superintendent in Colorado. Couldn't say if there's a superintendent in Georgia that thinks that way, but all I know is that is their philosophy. Those that are driving it. I'm going to take questions at the end. All right, just quickly, the testing piece of it. This was a huge concern for the governor's office and for Dr. Barge because of the money and the expense. But I want you to look, we were a part of the PARC consortium, which was writing the tests, that are writing the tests, and look at the amount of federal dollars that was paid to those consortia to develop the tests. That's your federal influence. And again, whatever the test questions are what's going to be taught in the classroom. We no longer are a part of the PARC consortium. We pulled out. What we're concerned about is Dr. Barge has made statements, well, maybe we'll just join a couple states. Maybe we'll join with Florida and Alabama, you know, the surrounding states, maybe a regional test. If it's regional, that means we're still using the same Common Core standards, and we're not about that. We want Georgia to be determining that. And I've always said that it's probably cost productive to partner with other states because then you've got the you're sharing testing questions and it's not as expensive. But when it comes to money and it comes to parental control and rights, guess what's always going to win? Saving some money versus over parental input and control and local control as well. So what we're asking is don't even go that direction, Dr. Barge. Please, Georgia wants to do their own tests so that we have control of our own standards and our own curriculum. But we applaud them for pulling us out of something that would have just broke our backs financially. There are some costs involved, a lot of unfunded mandates, a lot of it is through teacher training, which has not always been that robust. Of course, textbooks. I live in Cobb. We had the big textbook issue about not spending all that money on textbooks that are tied to the Common Core that we think are going away. And of course, the assessments. The assessments are all technology driven. You've got to have the computers, you've got to have all of that in your schools to be able to do that. All right, so that's the testing part. The final part is the how are the feds tracking your children? Well, the stimulus bill plus the race to the top is a massive student database system. In Georgia, the federal government, we received millions of dollars to develop the state longitudinal database system. Now that is multifaceted. Part of it was so that all the Georgia school systems are tied together within the state electronically. Now, I don't live in the 18th century. My bread and butter is technology. I get that it is very nice to be able, if I am a parent moving from one school district to another in the state of Georgia, to have my kids' data passed through. I don't have a problem with that. But the problem is When will that data leave the state of Georgia? And what do they have in mind of data tracking for our kids? And we were told by a state legislator, oh, I went over and talked to the Department of Education, and they're only tracking your student scores. I know that's not true because I've seen part of the state longitudinal database system. I know what they're tracking. They're tracking if your kids have gotten in trouble, they're tracking if your kids are on medication, they're tracking all of that, and all of that follows the student. And I just have a real problem on that data getting in the hands of the wrong people. Kids need to be able to have clean slates. They need to be able to start all over sometimes. And when that data is all in there and can be easily sent out to other people, then I have a problem with that. On the other side, they have resources on the state longitudinal data system where teachers can exchange resource ideas. The problem is, I don't have a problem with them exchanging ideas within the state of Georgia, but do you want a teacher teaching your child or your grandchild getting resources from a state that does not have some of our cultural values, or some of our values, i.e. maybe the city of San Francisco? Okay, and teachers will have access to all of that. And so I struggle with that piece on that. But they're tracking our kids. It is in place. Every state has one, by the way. Now all they need is a way to be able to connect them federally. And there is a bill sitting kind of dormant at the national level to be able to connect databases together. The PARC consortium is contractually obligated to turn over student-level data. This was a problem what we had with the PARC. Even though the governor, through his executive order, said we'll get out, we're not going to do any student data transfers, well, we were contractually obligated to do them. So we continue to keep an eye on this because it's very, very scary. We do know at the federal level that the Obama administration has gutted FERPA through regulation. A parent used to be able to step into a public school knowing that their kid's data would stay within the school system. Matter of fact, I worked in the technology area and we were all about FERPA, FERPA, FERPA. Everything was FERPA. Well, it doesn't mean anything anymore. It's been gutted. Notice that the department intends to use these longitudinal data systems to capture, analyze, and use student data from preschool to high school, college, and the workforce. So we've got a problem. There is out on the U.S. Department of Education's website, it's in draft form. I doubt that they're doing this right now, but that the idea that it's out there, that they are going to start measuring kids' grit, tenacity, and perseverance. That's just how they think, how they feel. Go out and look at it. They move it around all the time. It's not happening in Georgia right now. But because it's out there, there stands a chance that they're going to do it. They want to, we collect billions of records of data. We're pulling data from everywhere, tens of thousands of places. Look at the second line. Common Core is the glue that ties everything together. Common Core, they need Common Core. They need the testing mechanism for that. All right, so I'm going to move ahead really, really quick to we're making progress because I know my time's about up. Yeah, let me get my notes on this. I think because of grassroots activism that we're making tremendous progress in Georgia, but we've got a ways to go on this. Back in February, Senator William Ligon, state senator from Brunswick, introduced Senate Bill 167 and Senate Bill 203. We didn't think it was going to go anywhere. We were basically told it wasn't going to go anywhere. But we got a hearing. And we had this massive amount of people come down. Grassroots, put the emails out, people showed up. That hearing was packed. We thought we would have the votes to get it out of the hearing, but one by one our votes were picked off. So, but what it did is it began to provide a groundswell of support. The governor back in early February and March just loved the Common Core. Well, we're beginning to hopefully change his mind a bit, change his policy people's mind a lot. That's where we need help. But in March, Governor Deal and State Superintendent Barge, they were both in love with the Common Core. In May, the governor signed his executive order that basically put us hopefully in the right direction. He said that, you know, we're going to have control over our standards in Georgia. Well, that can't happen as long as we're doing Common Core. But he did sign the executive order, and in July, both the governor and State Superintendent John Barge agreed to pull us out of the PARC, the testing consortium. And then finally, on August 21st, the governor has ordered the state school board to review the Common Core national guidelines and ask the State Board of Education to formally unadopt. It's a reading list. We have this reading list, a Common Core reading list out there. So right now, the state school board is doing an analysis on the Common Core per the governor's request. We've come a long way since February. 10 minutes? Okay. So we all attribute that to the grassroots because we want sovereignty in our education, and we believe that the governor and Dr. Barge hold the control of that. And here is our strategy. How do we resume control of our education and of the standards? We want to pass 2 bills. Now, we think it's going to be coming down to 1 bill. But it's Senate Bill 167 and Senate Bill 203. In your brochure, we have listed the 2 pieces of legislation. We've been told that it'll probably start in the Senate. So our goal is to focus on the Education Committee in the Senate, the Senate Education Committee, Senate Education and Youth Committee. We need this passed out of that committee. And so we need for you to make calls to the Education Committee members on the Senate side. I don't care if they're your senator or not. We need pressure to put on that. We had a state senator say, look, I'm only interested in hearing from my constituents. But if that state senator controls what happens to me in my area, well, then he needs to hear from me as well. But this is what the legislation does. It withdraws us out of Common Core. PARC testing we're out of, but we don't want any regional testing. Prohibits the adoption of future curriculum standards, and it prohibits the intrusion of student data tracking. If you go out and look at that bill, it is very comprehensive in how it monitors what type of data can be transferred. The big one is Senate Bill 203. It establishes a curriculum content student advisory council so that Common Core doesn't happen again. Now, our strategy is legislation. It's not just getting the state school board to reverse course. Because what got us into the problem? The superintendent and the governor just signing something. So if we don't want them just to unsign, we want it through legislation so that it is through the force of law that they can't do it. And we want our legislators involved. We want them in the loop. That's our strategy, is passing that legislation. So how do we get there? Please call these 2 offices. Please. If you've already called the governor's office, call the governor's office again. I know if you're on AFP's mailing list, we did 1 blitz call into his office. We will be doing it again, but they got a tremendous amount of phone calls when we asked people to call in. We got their attention. But those 2 men hold the reins on this. Actually, Governor Deal is the big one. We know that if we can get his support, it will help. Tremendous. So we're working on those 2 guys. And then take action. Please call your state representative, state senator, and tell them to support those bills. I think it makes me a little sick to think that we have to depend on Governor Deal to put pressure on our legislators to do the right thing. Our legislators need to be doing the right thing whether the governor agrees with it or not. That's what a Republican form of government is. That's where the voice of the people are, not this top-down executive approach. So we need to put pressure on them to do that. And then go to meetings. We do know when people are showing up at meetings, they're asking about the Common Core. Ask some questions. We like the first one. Why is it that the only Republicans in the state who don't see a problem with the Common Core are the Republicans elected in office? Why are they the only ones? So there are things that you can do, and we ask that you become engaged in the fight with us. We do believe that this has huge momentum, and that we have got the issue on our side that we think we can have success in. It's crumbling across the country. So I will take some questions. If anyone has any 5 minutes of questions, yes, sir.
Yeah, at one point on the previous slide, it says oppose adoption of curriculum standards. I think what I understand what you're saying there is we should write our own. Is that the point?
Yes, and that's a great question because, you know, we don't want to leave the governor and Dr. Barge high and dry. What do? Well, go back to the 2010 standards.
Yeah.
They were as good or better than the Common Core, and then start from there and get input in from across the state. Absolutely, but we have some good standards. And if we want to look at something that's in the Common Core, great, but let that be a state-led effort and not being pushed down. So
Yeah.
that's what we want.
Yeah, I think it's important whenever we say we don't want something, we need to give the alternative.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. And the alternative is starting with the Georgia Performance Standards, and then and then making it through an advisory, through legislation, through that advisory council, letting it be a grassroots up initiative on the formulation of standards going forward. Good point. Yes.
Now, what would be the strategy to counter the argument that the ACT and SAT are going to be in alignment with Common Core? So by us disengaging, then somehow that our kids won't do well on the ACT or SAT.
That is becoming a big elephant in the room, because we do know that the College Board is aligning it to that, and we've actually been talking about that. Coming up, I've heard a state senator make that comment that Georgia parents will not, they want their kids to be able to go to schools, and the schools are going to be taking SAT and ACT. Right now, there isn't a solution to that, except that if we can get enough states, and that's happening across the country, to disengage from the Common Core, that it's not going to be worth their time to do the tests. But that is a problem. That's why there's such efforts out in the other states to try to disengage it enough that if you only have half the states involved with Common Core, then it's not going to be financially conducive for them to write SAT and ACT, except that you see that's the power that they're pushing, trying to push onto the states. Come up with an alternative testing mechanism to go into universities. Who says that we have to depend on the ACT and the SAT? If they're going rogue, let us develop something that is ours, that is more what the values of our country want, and not these rogue. And it's David Coleman who's over there at the College Board pushing this. So I think that's a very valid question, but I think it's one that I think they want us to duck under and run and hide and say, okay, we give up on that, when I think we can become very solutions oriented, but I think we need to move on that. I agree with that. Yes.
Be better. It might be better than theirs.
Yes.
But anyway, how does this impact the Common Core? How does it impact homeschooling, parochial schools, private schools?
Really,
And
exactly like
that
he has said, because the homeschoolers have to take the SAT and the ACT to get into college, then they not only are going to have to teach the standards, but they've got to teach the Common Core method, because the tests are not just content, it is a methodology of the way that they're testing. And if you've ever heard Jane Robbins, who is on our DVD, she uses the example out of Indiana, which got the Indiana moms really, really upset. I cannot tell the story like she tells it, but bottom line is the daughter came home and their testing question said, if bridge A is 340 feet and bridge B is 500 feet, which bridge is longer and why? Well, bridge B is longer because 500 feet is longer than 340 feet. She got it wrong because she didn't answer it the Common Core way. She didn't explain it out. Because the Common Core tests are all process oriented. And we don't test that way. So homeschoolers will have to start teaching the process of Common Core the math talks and the thinking it out and the writing it out, or the kids won't do well on the tests. And so that's what's going to hurt the homeschoolers, because they won't test well and their hands are being forced. Matter of fact, I heard even Becca, which is the big homeschooling curriculum, that they're starting to, yes, fall in line. We heard that last week. Or 2 weeks ago.
Let's take one more.
Okay, so, yes.
Oh, well, you came and spoke to our Tea Party in Forsyth County, and we are getting a lot of pushback from the local school board and one of our state reps.
Yes.
Yes, and he had passed out this book at a Republican Party meeting, said, oh, hey, you can look at this, or contact me, and you can see this book, what's in here, and it's really shown how rigorous, use that word again, this curriculum standards are. And I didn't get a chance to look at it, but he gave me his card, and he'll send it to me, and I contacted him, I have not heard from him.
But you do me a favor for him, because he says that he doesn't hear from parents, he doesn't hear from
Yeah.
constituents. I think that you all
He knows
need
I'm
to
not.
do that, because he says he does, and if he's not, then that's a problem in the grassroots. But yeah, I know who you're talking about, and he needs to be convinced that this is not what the grassroots
Right.
wants.
Oh, yeah, and here's the other thing, that the school board's like, oh, well, we're jerking teachers around, and they don't want to be jerked around, they don't have to be trained, and so it's like, you know.
And my only comment to that is, I agree in Georgia, the teachers are constantly
Yeah,
having to,
but
but you know what? If you're
that's-
heading toward a cliff and about to go over the cliff, these teachers,
Somebody to
when
check it
when
out.
these tests come out
Yeah.
and their evaluations are aligned, 50% of their evaluation is aligned to the testing mechanism, and they have no control over the testing mechanism, then the teachers are all of a sudden are going to kind of wish that we would have reversed course. So
Yeah.
what they don't know is how bad the tests, well, we don't know we don't know what we don't know because of the testing. But I say we need to reverse course, because we're heading in a very dangerous and bad way. And if I were a teacher in the classroom and I had no control and I couldn't go to Dr. Barge on test questions, but yet my evaluation was tied to that, I would be a little concerned. But see, the teachers aren't being told that.
No.
They're not being told that. They are concerned about that evaluation piece, but that's another story. But yeah, anyway.
Tanya, thank you. Let's
Thank
have a for all that you continue to do in kind of leading on this. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about it. What would Dr. Seuss according to Common Core? One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Well, the question is not, is the fish blue or red? It's how did he get to be whatever color he is? Did you use the right process to determine that? What about the fish? Does he have to be a fish?
Oh, you
I
could be
mean,
a testing writer.
you think Dr. Seuss is confusing
They make
now?
lots of money,
Yeah.
those test writers.
Good luck.